Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview.
Before we do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to the folks at Amplexor for sponsoring my podcast for the coming month. Amplexor is preparing to launch a really exciting virtual series called Ignite Revenue Through Content, which will feature leading speakers and thinkers in short, punchy, and thought-provoking bi-monthly episodes, exploring and highlighting insights and best practices of how to leverage content as a strategic differentiator. It'll run from August through mid-December, and kicking it off on August the 20th will be yours truly, talking about unleashing your inner punk, a rebellious take on customer engagement. I think the session that we've organized will be awesome. In fact, it's a real honor to be asked to do it, and I'm really looking forward to it. So go to amplexor.com and search for Ignite Revenue Through Content. To find out more, register for free, and to check out the full agenda. Go register today, and I hope to see you there. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Let's get back into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Joe Corson, who is the CEO of the Institute of Customer Service here in the UK. Now, Joe, I should say, welcome back to the podcast, because actually the last time you were on here was back in 2012, no less. So welcome back.
It's brilliant to be back, Adrian. And my God, if we think back to 2012, what a significantly different landscape we are now all operating in. But it's great to be back with you.
That is a statement. So Joe, just for the benefit of our listeners and also our readers, can you tell us a bit about you and a bit about the work that you do across the ICS?
Certainly. And Adrian, my mum frequently asks me what I do for a living. So in a nutshell, what do? We try to help organizations and individuals to really think about what the customer experiences that they are developing in quite practical terms. So that can be through looking at the research, looking at training, looking at qualifications, looking at accreditation, looking at a whole host of things to look at how they are delivering excellent customer experience and how they can get better at doing that. And we do that, Adrian, not because it's a nice thing to do, but all of our research shows us that there is a hard economic reality. So those organizations that consistently deliver over a longer period of time, higher levels of customer satisfaction tend to outperform, be that they are generate higher levels of productivity, they will generate higher levels of profit, they will generate higher levels of satisfaction overall, but also loyalty, higher levels of trust, which has become more important, and reputation. So basically, everything we're trying to do is to help organizations to get better at this stuff because it matters. It matters.
Awesome. Absolutely. I mean, I've been a follower of your kind of work and admirer of your work for, ever since I got into this space, which now, when I've started focusing on service and experience, like crumbs 12 years or so ago, the ICS was a go-to source for information and research and insight and things. And I noticed that you've also just published the July
2020 update of the UK Customer Satisfaction Index, which effectively is a reflection of the state of customer satisfaction in the UK. So can you tell me about the research? I mean, it's just come out. It's like fresh off the printing presses. Tell me about the research and what some of the main headlines are.
Okay, so thank you, Adrian. And you're right, we do this piece of research. We've been doing it for 10 years. So it's built up quite a steam, and it's got quite a lot of background and information, which gives us a really good longitudinal picture of what's going on with customer satisfaction in the UK. And, we do it twice a year. It has over 45,000 responses. It covers 13 different industry sectors. And it really is, as you've indicated, Adrian, a barometer of customer satisfaction. And as I've said, the reason why that is so important is because of the link to better performance and the link to higher levels of productivity. And over that whole kind of 10-year period, we've seen some ups and downs, if I was brutally honest. And we're currently in what I would call a bit of a down period.
Right.
So actually, since July 2017, customer satisfaction in the UK has been falling. And in the latest results, it's flatlined, really. So flat. So on a year-on-year kind of look at where we are slightly down. We are slightly improved than where we were in January, but actually year-on-year, we're pretty flat in terms of the levels of satisfaction. Areas across those 13 sectors where we've seen some improvements, we have definitely seen some improvements within the public services sector, because if you look at the rankings, if you like, in the sector, the top performing sectors tend to be in the whole area of leisure and retail. Towards the bottom, we have utilities, transport and telcos, and then a big sway in the middle.
Right.
And if you look at the latest results, what you're seeing is, as I said, it's flat overall. Public services actually had a bit of an improvement, but actually, and maybe not surprisingly, given COVID-19, areas like tourism actually fell and actually have been quite significantly impacted by the current crisis, as has also the insurance sector.
Perfect. Now, rather than, I mean, I know the research is freely available on the from the website, and we'll get to that where people can find that kind of later. But what I wanted to do is also just to dig into a few areas and themes or so, just to give people a bit of a flavour of the research, if I may. And you mentioned COVID-19. Now we're in the midst of it. But the thing I wanted to ask was like, how, from your research, how have you seen that organizations have generally performed? I mean, because I know there's a perception, but then how, from an organizational perspective, who have you seen, or which sectors have you seen have performed kind of like really well, and who have kind of like stumbled?
I think it's a really interesting question, Adrian, because I think what we have seen in this latest wave, and we call them waves, is some real winners and losers. So we've seen some organizations that appear to have done quite well through the COVID-19 period, and some organizations that have been found a little bit more wanting. And there are also, however, a number of organisations that consistently do well. So if I look at the top 10 of the UK CSI, there are a certain number of names that historically, and again this time round, are generally there. So the sorts of names that you often see in the top 10 of the UK CSI are people like Amazon, people like Nationwide, people like First Direct, John Lewis. Those tend to be the brands that have been in there. But interestingly, this time around, there are those names, but also some of the more traditional brands as well, like so people like Marks and Spencer's are back in the top 10 this time.
Right.
So it's been quite interesting when you look at the, as I said, the winners and losers, or not so well performing. And there is a definite period about what we've been going through, because if I look at other stats around what's gone on during this period, what we've seen is many organisations actually, as we entered the crisis, improved their customer satisfaction. I know, Adrian, you've also seen this.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we're at quite an important and quite pivotal moment, because we're starting to see we're all a bit more edgy, as consumers are all getting a little bit tired of some things. So we're starting to see some of those kind of challenges coming. It's going to be really interesting about what happens in the next 6 months, 12 months to overall customer satisfaction. Because one thing I am rather concerned about, if I was honest, Adrian, is when you enter an economic crisis or when organization, and if you look back to 2008, the period after that, when we went through the recession, customer satisfaction fell in the UK, and it fell quite dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I've got a bit of a plea, is that, you know, the last thing that we need, we're a service nation. 80% is services generated, nearly 80% of our workforce are in customer services. So we really need to make sure that we don't take the eye off the ball. We don't kind of see services as a nice to have or a soft element, that we really kind of focus on that, because I am concerned that this decline that we've had could get worse if organizations don't hold their nerve, if you like, and don't really, really focus on that. So it's a really important point for me. About
I think you're absolutely right, Joe. I think it's an interesting kind of thing, because we've seen, you know, I've been talking about it in terms of observing what I call the tectonic plates of both business and consumer behavior and how they're changing and shifting over the course of this pandemic. And I guess the question is, you know, how much of that change is going to stick, as it were. And, you know, the thing that I wanted to ask about, though, was this idea of, have you noticed about whether our perception of service has changed over this kind of period? Have you kind of felt that kind of, have you picked that up in your kind of results because of that you know, the change in people's mindsets, the thing that we're going through right now, it sort of changed the dynamics. You know, the edges are different, you know, right now. So have you noticed a change in perception and a change in the kind of value of service?
So I think we've seen a couple of things. Certainly the concept of the essential workers. And if you think about the people that have literally kept the lights on, made sure that we're fed, Adrian, looked after us, transported, you know, people that have actually been looking after us, I think there is a greater recognition of the importance of that. And certainly other research outside of the UKCSI definitely is demonstrating that to me. So I think there are more of us understanding the importance of service, and there are more of us, I think, recognizing the important role. However, and it's quite sad to see, we're also seeing in some cases, it's not you know, widespread, but we are certainly seeing in some sectors also you know, more abuse and more intolerance actually from some consumers.
Yes.
Quite interesting how that is going to play out over the next 12 months. So as we're seeing people in customer facing roles having to take greater responsibility, if you think about, you know, managing social distancing, managing, for example, the wearing of face masks, possibly telling people that they can't do things.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be an interesting tension. And for me, it's really important that we support our customer professionals through that very, very challenging period, because, you know, I think there's a real need to uphold it as a profession and uphold our people that stood in the front line.
Yeah.
So I think things are going on, actually, Adrian. I think it takes a long time to change consumer and customer behaviour. But what we've seen in the initial stages are much more about local, much more about community, much more about things which are affecting me personally. Probably in a certain number of cases, certainly a greater awareness and understanding of the importance of customer service and the roles that people play, but some evidence too that that's not always played out in the nicest of ways. And as I said, an increasing hostility in some sectors towards those people in customer service.
Well, indeed. I mean, we've got to hope that is you know, that it gets as minimized as it possibly can. I mean, it's just unfortunate that some people kind of act that way. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was because sometimes we can't deal with any of that sort of stuff. That's just about other people, right? And that's almost the nature, you know, of sometimes the world that we live in and the job that we do. But on page, I think it was 51, if not 50 of the report, I know that there's this, you put together a table in answer to the question, what are the most important things organizations should focus on during the COVID-19 kind of crisis? And I wanted you to, I mean, I looked at those results and I was like, that feels like a bit like a shopping list for people to do. And I'm like going, tell me about that, because that feels like there's some good advice in there. So can you tell me about the kind of the results of those kind of questions
And
Thank you, Adrian.
and if those kind of like, do you think some of those things might kind of change kind of as conditions ease or develop?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I would say is, and you can see this in the UK CSI, there are things that you have to do from a customer experience which are quite functional, but they are really important. So some of the things around making sure that you're easy to do business with, that your product service experience does what it said it's going to do, that actually you handle your complaints well, that your staff are professional. All of those things are kind of a given. You know, if you can't do those things, and it's hard. I'm not saying that it's not easy. You know, it's hard to consistently do that well, and you know, but that is something that we need to do. What is interesting, and we've started to see this in the last couple of years, also the combination of what I would call maybe more softer elements have also become more important, and we're starting to see that actually coming out. So the ethical behavior of an organization. Do I believe that this organization, its customer ethos, puts the heart of the customer at the front? Do I believe that there's a real emotional connection with this organization? So do I trust them? Do they make me feel reassured? Do I believe that you're making you know, my ability to interact with you in a way that I would prefer? Do I believe that you care about me? Those things in the last couple of years, we've started seeing to come out more. And I think this has been a growing trend and something that we're going to continue to see. And when we look at that playing out, you know, what's during the COVID-19, what have been the really kind of the bellwether, the key things that have actually really mattered? And the top three things are, Adrian, on that list that you referred to, are doing the right thing. And that has been really something that has come out very, very strongly. Organizations, brands that have done well through the COVID period, in my mind, have quite simply serviced really well. They've not sold, they've tried to help their customers. They've tried to think about, you know, walk in the shoes of your customer. And I think that's one of the kind of key things. Secondly, they have tried to protect their employees. And, you know, as customers, I think that has become quite important to us. The whole kind of, I mean, horrible nature of COVID-19 and making sure that we're keeping our employees safe. You know, there has certainly a group of customers actually really do care about that, and that matters to them. Needs of vulnerable customers. And then the whole area of vulnerable customers has also become quite interesting, because people are now vulnerable that perhaps we wouldn't have classified as vulnerable previously.
Yes.
And the other bits are around, you know, keeping me updated, making sure that there is an availability, make it easy to contact me, are some of the things that we've seen more traditionally. But I think there is a really interesting bit about doing the right thing. And I think that is something that actually for all of us, you know, going through what we are going through, some people sadly will have lost loved ones. Some people, you know, are in quite challenging personal situations. And a lot of the time that makes us reflect slightly differently. And maybe we're seeing some of that. You know, some of that things coming together, which will be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, like it seems to me that there seems to be like a big theme that's coming out of there, and it's something that I've been thinking about and seeing kind of increasingly over the last sort of year or so, is this idea that it feels like there's a movement by customers, and I think this has been highlighted, possibly accelerated by, you know, the pandemic, and also, you know, the Black Lives Matter sort of movement and so on and so forth, where it feels like more and more consumers, more and more customers are looking to organizations to exercise their agency on their behalf, whether it's to look after employees, look after vulnerable customers, look after the suppliers, look after the community, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do you think that's fair?
Yes. And if you looked at, you know, I was saying about, I've called them more emotional areas, more connected areas, you know, the thing around customer ethos, the trust thing, the loyalty, the ethical stance, and interestingly more about green as well. So how sustainable is what you're doing as an organization. And that certainly, I think, has mattered more. We're doing some research on this actually, Adrian, later on in the year, around two things really, around trust, but also around the whole sustainability piece. And I think doing the right thing, acting in a sustainable way, longer term, I think for many of us, we've started to realize, I mean, I'm sure personally I've realized that some of the things which I perhaps doing, do I really need to do them?
Mm.
Were they that important? So I think this genuinely a bit back to basics, but a bit more also back to community and to caring,
Yes.
and being a little bit more conscious of some of the decisions that we are making.
Yeah.
I think you're seeing that. I'd also say, Adrian, that there is and will be a significant group of people that are financially going to be really challenged, and we know that. So therefore, organisations thinking about how they can help their whole customer group through whatever challenges we are all facing, and there'll be a range of those. I think doing the right thing in that wider sense is going to be very, very important. And just thinking about it, I mean, there's three things, and I bang on about this all the time. There are three things that I really think are very important. When we set our strategies, and you and I would have written 5-year strategies, 3-year strategies, and now it's quite hard to even write a 6-month strategy because the world is moving so fast. But there are three things I think that we can, as organisations and as leaders, hold on to. And the whole thing around purpose, being really clear about what your purpose is, who you're serving, and what drives you, I think, both as an individual and as an organisation, is really powerful. Mm-hmm. Relevance, it's a hard question to ask yourself, but who would miss you if you weren't here?
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important as an organisation. What difference are you really trying to make? And the final bit for me is around impact. What is the legacy that we look to leave? We can do loads and loads of stuff, but really trying to be very clear. And, I, for one, it's very challenging. We're really trying to do multiple things, trying to, deliver both to your employees, to your customers, to your stakeholders, to your shareholders. Everything is shifting. But if you can hold on to those three things, I think that's quite a powerful way of just trying to keep yourself grounded, if I was honest. And being grounded and practical is really important.
Absolutely. I think the idea about purpose and relevance and impact, and what you talked about, being more conscious and almost like holistic in terms of how you think about things is and I framed it as this idea of organizational agency. And I think it's a really interesting sort of theme that's kind of developing, but I think you go on to sort of frame that. We talk about this, we believe there's 4 key factors that will frame the challenges for organizations as lockdown eases. And can you tell me about what those 4 things are? Because I think actually that nicely frames those things about in terms of the challenges that organizations need to think of, things they need to face, or things they need to be thinking about.
And all of this, Adrian, is with a very humble and straightforward mind over it, because it is really, really challenging. And the first, I guess, way of framing this is, this evolving threat of COVID-19, and how we're trying to measure that, to reduce it, how we're going to manage and try to reduce that whole piece. And the whole kind of thing around remote working, physical, virtual, online, offline, all of the things that have been driven specifically around just the environment we're working in, and the fact that actually we're not as free and as able as we were once, in terms of certainly the current environment. So the restrictions that this brings about us, that will definitely frame some of the things we can and cannot do, quite simply. Then I think there's this whole area, so second area really is around what is happening with customer needs, preferences, and their behaviours. And I've already alluded to this, Adrian, and I know you would feel the same. It's very difficult. In the short term, the initial bits around the behaviour was, as I said, quite reduced, working from home, thinking about my family, much more my little bubble, everything very much around your home, was clearly one part of that. As lockdown emerges and we start to move out a bit more, some of that will start to change. But, our preferences, what we like and what we don't like, some of those things also may change for the bigger bit. We've seen the significant rise clearly in digital and online, and that's clearly not, the genie's out of the bottle. It was already there before, but it's just going to, so some of those things. However, the backside of that, the other side of looking at that, is that actually, however much we use Zoom and we can do this brilliant, webinars and everything else, we do like people, and we are, we need contact. So I think there's also going to still continue to be a really strong need for the customer experience. And a really genuine customer experience and a real warmth around that. So it's clearly the changing behaviours in customers will certainly be another part of us. And thinking about our customers, if I'm an organisation, how are my customers changing, shaping, evolving?
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the third area is around, we've touched on this as well, really, but about the economic legacy for organisations, communities and individuals. I mean, wow, it's a real challenge in terms of where we are, recession versus depression, all of those and all of that it brings, localism versus national in terms of, and I'm talking about where we live, as in, is it my urban environment or is it a much more rural environment? Are we moving out of big uses of offices to, local hubs?
Mm-hmm.
So role, all of those things are mixing in terms of how I want to work. Will I want to commute? Do I want to get on the train? All of those things will play a part, and also the economic things. And then I think the big question for an organization is making sure that we try to navigate living in the short term, which I completely get. Some organizations, this is frankly about survival. So how do we live in the short term in order to be able to still be here, in 6 months, 12 months time?
Yeah.
But actually that means that we mustn't, as we were saying, sacrifice the importance actually of service and see it as an add-on or a bolt-on. That is absolutely not what service has been. And going back to where we started this conversation, essential workers have been so important to actually keeping the UK running, and therefore really focusing on the care aspect and the importance of customer service, I think is a great opportunity for the UK, but we mustn't drop that, and we must really focus on what that means and really listening to what our customers' needs are and making sure our propositions, our services, our product services are really fit for purpose.
Perfect. Now I was going to go on to, because I know in the report you go on to kind of develop those 4 areas into sort of 8 sort of key areas of focus for organizations, but I'm not going to talk about those because I think we've actually sort of covered them. And actually I'll kind of leave that and dangle that and tease that to people and say, if you want to find out what the 8 things are, go and get the report. And what I'll do is I'll skip to kind of saying, well, hopefully that's going to give people a bit of a flavor of some of the things that you're finding out and kind of what's bubbling to the top. I mean, is there anything else though that we've kind of like missed out that you think you'd want to highlight?
Really good question. I think, Adrian, you've been very good and the questions are very good. But I think for me, and we've already touched on this, doing the right thing, this authenticity, this kind of hunger, in the world that we're living in, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information, and we haven't talked much about data, but a lot of organizations will say to me, we have big data. And I say, no, you don't have big data, you just have a lot of data. So that whole thing around being able to navigate information and to use that in an effective way. So I think that's one thing about us thinking about that. How do we build trusted sources of information? And that links back to your brand and to what you're standing for. But I think the other area too that we as organisations, the whole area of around employee engagement and the fact that that's shifting and shaping, and also, we have not landed yet in terms of what the new world will be like. But this hybrid world, and getting comfortable, I guess, with living in a hybrid world, which may be a bit of remote, but also a bit of physical.
Yeah.
But how that is all impacting on the leadership in us in terms of organisations and how we want to be seen. And also the mental health and well-being of our people, I think is really, really important. So I guess what I would be saying, Adrian, is that there's so much to go for. There really, really is. And, I think this is a great opportunity for those of us that really are leaders and professionals in customer service to really demonstrate the impact of why this really, really matters and to champion the cause. Because that's certainly, we started something in March that was inspiring a service nation is what we've called it. And, there's so much opportunity, and every day I'm very lucky because I hear lots of really great examples, Adrian, of brilliant customer experiences and customer service. And it's a real privilege actually to work in the Institute and to run the Institute because you have a great insight into some of the brilliant things that many people are doing. So I think it's about holding faith and belief and really being, back to the purpose thing. So for me, I guess those three words: purpose, relevance, and impact, and just keeping yourself really grounded to those.
Mm-hmm.
After your people and yourself too, and try to nurture that. I think those are really important things.
So, I mean, but I also kind of know that, people also get bombarded with all sorts of different information. I mean, the amount of challenges that individuals and team leaders and supervisors and managers and exec leaders kind of are getting is they're in the middle of the massive changes, massive amounts of new information and things, and actually sometimes sifting through all that to find the kind of like, what's the first step that I should take, I think is sometimes really important. And so if I would say to you, for somebody listening into this or reading the highlights, and they were like going, okay, I want to know where to start, Joe. I want to improve the service and experience I deliver to my customers. I want to know where to start. I mean, what would be your best advice? Where should they kind of listen? What's the first thing they should do?
Well, I think there's three pieces of data that I always look at, or three pieces of information that I always find quite useful. One is, what are your employees telling you? So every organization will have employee data, as in, what we're doing well, where we're focusing, all of those sorts of kind of things. And that's quite important because we know there's a really big, strong link between employee engagement and customer satisfaction. So how are your employees feeling? And, getting that to, nothing quite like them telling you, what's good and what's not so good inside the organization. And then combine that with your customer satisfaction data. So, have we asked our customers, what's going well, what's not going so well, what they're like, what they don't like. So those two things. So what the customer is thinking and feeling is quite important. And also, what are your employees thinking and feeling? They're like the yin and the yang, aren't they? They're both sides, the same kind of things, but they really are connected. And then just connect that to your vision, your mission, and your values. Because if you're clear about where you're trying to get to, what's your overall mission, why do you exist? So, and then you've looked at what your customer data is telling you, and you look at what your employee data is telling you, you should be able to pull out 5 or 6 kind of key things that you can relate back to your purpose. And then if you can do that, then you can start to write your customer strategy. And it doesn't have to be a document that is 50 pages long. In fact, it's probably better if it isn't. It's about being really and spending a bit of time thinking about what is really important and what is going to drive higher levels of customer engagement and higher levels of customer sat.
Perfect. That's really good advice. Thank you for that, Joe. So enough about the report. I mean, it's great. And if people need to kind of want to get a copy of it, I guess they should go to look up the Institute of Customer Service UK
website, absolutely.
CSI July 2020, and I guess we'll find it, right?
Indeed, you will do. And also on that point, there's a whole set of what we've called hints and tips, during this particular challenging time. So there's all sorts of things about which are freely available, which are all around some of the issues we've talked about. So managing remotely, helping or supporting difficult conversations, why you should measure things at the moment, helping and supporting vulnerable customers, how you manage a team, motivate a team, how you use information, etc., etc. So hopefully there's some top tips in there too for people, which are, as I said, freely available.
Perfect. So let's kind of like switch gears a little bit and then look forward. Now, we did say that written 5-year strategy, written 3-year strategy, we don't even know what's going to happen at the end of the street, kind of like, never mind, kind of like what's going to happen next week right now. But if I was to actually put that aside and ask you to think forward, what do you think what does a future service look like? What do you think some of the key challenges are going forward?
Okay, so I think some of this will be what we've already been facing into. So there's going to be, we call this something, an area around essential services. So what have I got to do to be able to keep, we touched on this, all of the very important functional elements of the service experience there. So making sure that's joined up across the whole of the organization, making sure that everybody in the organization understands their role that they're playing in terms of serving part of that customer service experience. That will remain absolutely critical. and the whole customer journey and how you map that customer journey through that. So that will, for me, be really, really important. The balance between physical and virtual, and obviously the whole kind of role of AI and how we're using that in tech.
Mm-hmm.
That will undoubtedly, keep using the tech is my advice, that takes out anything that's transactional, and keep using the human, which is anything that is emotional. That still is the really important case that actually there's going to be a significant role for the human being in being able, because problems are going to be more complex, and therefore you use human beings to demonstrate that high level of empathy and connection and connectivity. And what this, I think, has done is made people generally feel more vulnerable. So actually, I think there's a really strong place and play for human beings as part of the service delivery experience. But what you've got to work out is anything that is transactional, let the tech take the strain, as far as I'm concerned, Adrian. So anything that is not adding, it's adding value because it's a service, but it's not adding emotional connection or connectivity. Then I'm ordering my tickets and buying my potentially my food. But the bits that I think are interesting are around helping me to be better in my life, trying to solve or sort problems for me. Then that's clearly helpfully delivered better by a human being in many cases. So I think that will be that shaping that the balance of how much is online and how much is virtual, online, or tech delivered, and how much is human delivered. That's probably our biggest thing to work out.
I think I completely agree, Joe. And I think what's interesting is that it's almost that you got to remember it's not about, I've seen this kind of as we've gone through this pandemic, when we have different organizations that have tried to do things in different ways. And that many people have looked at things from their own eyes rather than through their customers' eyes. Like I know there's been a bunch of financial institutions that have, when people wanted to take, say, a mortgage payment holiday, and they thought, oh, that's an important thing. And then therefore they've had customers waiting on the phone for like hours on end trying to get through. And yet there's been others that have said, no, actually, we're okay with that. We're going to do that. We're going to facilitate that through a digital kind of process. And so people, and it just becomes a pure transaction, make it easy for me, as it were. Be okay with this, make it easy for me, and then just process it. But actually, counterintuitively, by actually providing an easy way to do it by leveraging technology, has actually solidified the emotional connection that many of those customers have had with our organizations, because they've just turned around and go like, you have just got exactly where I'm at, and have helped me. And I think that's interesting. So almost it's like when you say do the right thing, but make sure you're doing the right thing from the right perspective as well.
Totally. It's got to be unauthentic. It's got to be very, very genuine. And, if you think about, so a couple of the supermarkets did very well collectively, but there were certain supermarkets that did particularly well. And that was because they really reached out and tried to understand and walk in the shoes of their particular customers. So instead of trying to sell more, they were giving out advice about, okay, so these sorts of things you can freeze, and these sorts of, I think then for one of the supermarkets, there was like 100 different ways to cook a chicken.
Right.
These are the types of cheeses that you can freeze. These are the sorts of ones that wouldn't. This is a good recipe for a lockdown situation. This is how you feed 20 people. Those sorts of kind of much more about connected and much more human. And that was the other thing, actually, we didn't touch on that, Adrian, but around the comms side, the communication side. Big change, I think, in communications over the last period, where organizations have been a little less corporate and a bit more connected and a bit more grounded. And I think that is really important. That's not about being funky. That's about just really understanding how to land your message and being authentic with your message.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Joe. So one final thing, one couple of kind of final questions before we kind of wrap up. And just for almost a bit of ongoing social research and a bit of fun, as I explained before we started the interview, I published a new book called Punk CX in the summer of last year. And what I've been doing since then, on every interview, I've been asking people a couple of questions, just almost like a word sort of brand association kind of game, as it were, because I'm collecting all of these words. And what I've been asking them is, firstly, what 1 or 2 words do you think would describe a more punk approach to service and or experience?
And I love it, and I think it's really great, and I understand. So we're trying to challenge things here. So my mantra, I guess, if it wasn't the purpose, relevance, and impact mantra, or the do the right thing, would be service with respect, because I think this is a really great opportunity to celebrate and to recognise, and more than that, to keep that alive, the very, very important roles that customer service professionals do. So respect is really important, and it's a great opportunity for us to really celebrate, recognise, and I guess promote the role of service. So service with respect would be my 3 words.
Perfect. And the second one, where is, can you think of a company or brand or maybe even just a sector that you think epitomizes that sort of punk ethos?
Okay, so often people would think about challenger brands or to think about new brands, and I'm going to be a bit controversial because I think certainly new entrants and new brands have challenged many ways of delivering the service experience. But I think what we're talking about is not just about delivering a new experience, it's about landing this with authenticity, it's about feeling connected. And I guess a brand that traditionally has done that well is now quite old school, but a brand that has generally done that quite well is First Direct. And that's quite interesting as an organisation. They're quite an established brand, but they certainly, I think, have listened and worked hard around really trying to understand their customer, try to move with the times, and actually being very people orientated and focused. But I'm always going to leave with a warning, which is, there is no room for complacency. And, what one thing has taught me and probably taught us all through this pandemic is nothing is staying the same and everything is shifting. Yeah. So things which we might have thought were, one example just quickly on this, Adrian, is 12 months ago, the high street was not necessarily deemed to be where people were going to go shopping. As we've said, one of the things that's probably going to come out of this is a much more local presence. So, we could really reimagine our high streets, and really imagine that as brand new community areas with, a whole range of different services, including retail, banking, work, everything else. So I think the watchword for me is just keep listening and keep watching and keep being clear about what you're trying to drive for that change. Because one thing's for certain, the acceleration, the speed, the whole change thing is with us and will be upon us and is going to continue to be with us as we go forward.
Joe, thank you for that. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's been too long since we last.
Definitely.
Since we last talked. I just wanted to say, I applaud you for the kind of the work that you do. The sense and the feel of the things that you're coming and what you're kind of saying and kind of what you're advocating for. I'm completely behind you on that. But also just want to say thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your kind of the research with us, and thank you for sharing your own particular perspective on the research and what it means for people that are intent on delivering better outcomes for both their customers and their employees and also the wider community. That's been awesome. So thanks very much.
Can I just say, Adrian, it's always a pleasure, and thank you also for all that you are doing too. So thank you very much, Adrian.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.